Property valuations coming out across Sedgwick County. Many people are seeing a spike in their appraisals. Now, state lawmakers are responding, taking action with a potential new law and state constitutional amendment to address property taxes. Cale Chapman talked to the state representative and Sedgwick County commissioner about how these changes could save you money.
People are receiving their property valuation notices this week, and when they receive their property tax bills, they're going to demand that something be done, and I don't blame them.
The Kansas House of Representatives passing a bipartisan bill and a state constitutional amendment, both aimed at giving Kansans some relief from property taxes. If it passes, the bill would incentivize taxing entities to stay within the rate of inflation by creating a fund for municipalities who keep their budgets in line, and create a protest petition voters can file to limit property taxes if they exceed that level. The constitutional amendment would change how valuations are calculated, relying on a rolling 3-year average instead of the current system.
I think there's a balance here, and the fact that you see people like county commissioners who are supporting this, I think it means it's good legislation.
Sedgwick County Commissioner Jim Howell says the bill has the right balance to provide relief for Kansans.
Well, actually, I am kind of excited about HB 2396. I think it's a good balance of what needs to happen. It empowers the people to control the size and scope of government. It actually provides some funding and an incentive to local government to keep our budgets conservative and small as possible.
But he's concerned the constitutional amendment could just shift the burden from people whose valuations are higher onto other people.
When you put in mechanisms to cap the assessments or the appraisals, or you put in math that smooths that out over a number of years, you are essentially shifting that burden to someone else. It creates as many problems as it solves. And that's why I think that HB 2396 is a better law, because it doesn't tinker with the appraisal system. It deals with the issue of spending.
In Wichita, Cale Chapman, 12 News.
Again, both the proposals would need to pass through the Senate to become law. The constitutional amendment faces an extra step after Senate approval. It will need to be decided on by voters in an election.